Our next guests are a lot like any set of parents, nurturing two active children and running a household. In their day jobs, however, they are guiding a profoundly important national conversation. Melissa Giraud and Andrew Grant Thomas, among other things, host a monthly web-based dialogue, and their program is called Embrace Race. We'll give you more information on their website, but they mirror conversations that go on in their own house and through their monthly webcast, conversations across the country with experts and listeners and discussions about race, parenting, and having honest conversations. Melissa, Andrew, welcome to Feel Like You Belong.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Alan.
You've made us feel like we belong. Thank you.
You bet. So before we begin talking about your really important work, tell us a little bit about your own personal immigration stories. Maybe Melissa first?
Sure. Alan, I am not an immigrant, but Andrew is, but I am the child of immigrants. So my mother is French-Canadian from a tiny town outside of Montreal called Sainte-Thérèse. And my father is an immigrant from a little island called Dominica, which is not the Dominican Republic.
Good to clarify that. Yeah. And so, how did your parents meet?
They met in Canada because my father was sent by these crazy stories, by the Belgian priests on his island to medical school in Belgium. So even though he was English speaking, he did his medical school in French and then did a residency in Montreal, where my mother was the lead dietitian. So that's how they met.
And so when did they come to the U.S.?
So they came, so one sister was actually born in Puerto Rico. So they came in between us. That would be, I'm giving my age, about 49 years ago.
Okay. And so what city were you born in?
So I was born in Massachusetts, in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and then raised in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Sure. And Andrew, what about your story?
So my parents came from Jamaica. I was born in Jamaica. Myself came at an early age. I was seven and a half when I came in the 70s.
What part of Jamaica?
And, I was born in St. Andrew, right, which contains Kingston. Mm-hmm. And we settled down in New Haven. Initially, it was going to be 1 or 2 years, and we've been here ever since.
Okay. Is there a big Jamaican community there?
Certainly, there's a large community in Hartford, Connecticut. And that's, I think my father had some people in Hartford, which may explain why he settled there.
Although they came for the education, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So can you tell me, both of you, maybe Andrew first, what was your first understanding? Because as small kids, we really don't always recognize the world around us. But what was the first moment that you remember that race sort of hit you, like this exists, growing up?
I think certainly for me, it was first and foremost a culture shock, right?
Okay.
So, I remember being 7 and a half, and I think I arrived in January, and it was
in the
snowing.
Northeast, yeah.
This is January in the Northeast, and it was snowing. So I remember my first snow. I remember being, amazed by that. I remember certainly being, in elementary school and being teased by the other kids around about how I spoke, about my accent. Sure. I remember subsequently practicing in front of a mirror to erase my accent. Wow. Because it was, it posed such a challenge for me with the other kids.
And every kid wants to fit in.
And every kid wants to fit in. Certainly race was part of it. Jamaica is a 90% black island. And I went to a school that was probably 90% white. Certainly it's a thing I mentioned, but still I think the culture piece was even more salient.
And what was your, staying with your childhood for a minute, what was your sense of acceptance in the African American community?
It's an excellent question. The truth is that, and I think it's still true, that West Indians in general, Jamaicans in particular, I think it was true of my parents, consciously or not, I'm not sure, that they certainly, I don't know if they held themselves apart from African Americans, but they certainly distinguished themselves from African Americans, right? So they decidedly were not, I'm not sure if they necessarily call themselves black or it would have been comfortable for them to refer to themselves as black. And my mother certainly is very clear today that she is Jamaican, right, and West Indian, although she's now spent clearly the majority of her life. And it's not that that's wrong, I'm not saying that but I do think, the importance and value of the Jamaican and West Indian identity for my parents is largely to do with, sort of the reality of that, right, cultural, historical, etc., but in part to do with distinguishing, right, between that and African American with whom you might otherwise be confused.
Sure. So, Melissa, what about you? Talk about racial identity for you, and also your understanding growing up when it became clear that there was something going on here.
Right. Well, I now identify as biracial, black and white, and my parents really didn't use black or white to talk about themselves. They would always say, you're children of the world, that kind of thing. And they had a lot of immigrant friends, mostly immigrants from all over, mostly kind of developing world. And they did the same thing, when I'd hear parents having conversations about kids not knowing where they fit in. And then they'd say, and I told her she's a citizen of the world, or I'm not going to check that box. My kid's a citizen of the world. So there was this kind of romance of it that didn't really help us as children with the analysis, right? So it was very confusing for me in terms of first memories. I remember playing with my cousins, my dad's cousins' kids, and I'm white passing at times. It sort of depends on context, and my cousins are not. And so we would just play and see them quite a lot. And there were people in the playground we were playing with, and they asked my cousins, who are these people? And they said, they're our cousins. And they said, no, they can't be your cousins. That was very early. So yeah, just recognizing, I remember very early, I think it was in kindergarten, that again, feeling left out. We were going to Dominica for Christmas and we were going to miss the big pageant. And my parents never let me forget it. They said, it was the middle of winter in Massachusetts. And I said, why can't you be like other parents whose kids don't have to go to Dominica so I could be in the pageant? Or I said, why couldn't you be like them? And they thought that was really funny because Dominica's quite lovely.
Alan, can I share?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've told Melissa this, and it's really true. So we've known each other. We've been, we started dating 25 years ago. So we've known each other a long time. We met in Chicago. And one of the things that really, that I found so incredibly appealing and still do about Melissa, is that she really sort of crosses lines of difference, right, in relating to people, whether it's racial, really any kind. I mean, we're talking about race now, but really any, sort of sexual orientation, gender expression, etc., age, in ways that, with an ease that I think very, very few people do, right? And I noticed that about her. Right, it's not something I was looking for. Right. It's something I really noticed, and I think I can't imagine that you can explain it without reference to not just her background, sort of racial, ethnic, neighborhood, all of that, immigrant, all of that, but also her own response to it, right? The way it shaped her sensibility about people. So, I mean, that comes to mind not only because it's true and it's so striking, but also because, she is often, she is often identified as white. by others, and yet very few people, I really think very few people of any stripe could have that sensibility without this kind of,
Sure.
complexity she has, that she encompasses in her own identity.
Thanks, honey. I mean, I think that the feeling of that, of crossing, lots of boundaries, is more one of, I don't fit in anywhere. I mean, that was kind of the childhood feeling. So you sort of always have to make that effort. But then years later, now that I'm kind of more comfortable and understanding of who I am, I still operate that way.
Sure. Sure. So it sounds like in many ways you were meant to do Embrace Race, but what is the evolution of this project?
The evolution is really that we have kids ourselves, and when we started to think about, raising them in this racially hierarchized world, we realized that we knew that we had thought about race a lot, professionally and personally, and felt equipped to do it if anyone was equipped to do it. But we even found it hard. We found it really hard. And so
what makes the conversation about race hard?
Well, it's not just the conversation. It's it's what to do. It's how to model. It's how to choose a school or a neighborhood, or race makes everything hard in the U.S.
I mean, there's a real practice, right? There's a real practice that is, ideally, that's all encompassing, that goes well beyond, certainly what you say to your children. And, just to amplify a little bit of what Melissa said, I think for me, it's, as she said, the sort of, obviously, this sort of real personal, felt, experience connection to the significance of race, ethnicity, and the importance in lives. It's our professional background. But it's also, I think, we wanted to do more than simply learn how to respond to or how to react to things that happen, right? So children say things happen at school, they come home with stories, things happen in the news that they're exposed to. So those are, and obviously that's part of the story, but we really wanted to be more proactive, right? Have a philosophy, have sort of some principles that we could have, essentially have an affirmative idea about how do we do this, already complicated job of parenting, how do we do it in a way that's really sort of race positive, as Melissa said, race affirming. Mm-hmm. And we didn't find anything, or very, very little, that allowed us to do that. And no community, right? No active community of, fellow parents and others who share these concerns, which clearly would be really important and valuable. Mm-hmm. So we thought, okay, maybe we need to try to actually create that. And once we did try, we built it and they came.
So what are your professional backgrounds that would lead, plus your personal experience, that would lead you to do this?
Well, mine is in education. I was a teacher in K-12, and then I also did a lot of consulting on equity in education and how to build more equitable schools, communities, all of that. And then I also was an NPR producer.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Yeah, I was an NPR producer in D.C., and I did do that included time doing stories with my former students who I was very, fourth graders who I was very connected to, in part, I think, because they were all Mexican and Mexican-American immigrants, and most of them had immigrated in their short lives, before they came to me in fourth grade. And I reported stories on them and sort of their experiences of being transnational. And you can go to NPR and various places and still listen to them.
So was this a dual epiphany, or did one of you come to the other and say, honey, I have this really great idea?
I said that. No, I'm kidding.
I think it happened. I think we came to it at the same time because as parents we were, having, of course, a lot of shared experience, right? Mm-hmm. So I had done a lot of my whole career has been devoted to race work, right? So research and advocacy work, at the national level, typically in stuff we consider, systems or structural stuff, right? So it's about the education system and health and criminal justice and housing and employment, et cetera. So, certainly I came in to parenting with lots of strong convictions, and really good reasons for them for thinking race really, really mattered. And it would matter. It matters not only for all of us, it would certainly matter for our children, right, who are two brown-skinned girls, right? And that it would matter for them not only because, they are sort of subject to the dynamics of race in this country, but also because they will act, right? They act on others and have, some capacity to shape those dynamics. And both of those really matter to us.
And part of why what spurred it really, I think, is that we had friends who were doing this with us, having these discussions about kids and what their kids were saying and all that and doing. And we started a parenting and race group with some of those friends. And that led us to, in preparing for that, realize that there weren't great resources for parents, and also that parents just do not have time, especially with young kids, to get together. So we thought, can't there be something virtual when you want advice at 3 a.m.
and really expand your reach beyond your living room and your circle of friends?
Yeah, exactly. And
Well, it turns out that as we started Embrace Race almost 3 years ago. And so this, of course, was, long after Barack Obama had come in. And after that initial, right, does that mean we're post-racial? Clearly, it became increasingly clear to a lot of people that no. And in fact, there was, a strong backlash against the Obama presidency. And then we had, right, Black Lives Matter, which, the Dreamers and all the turmoil about Islamophobia. And then, of course, the Trump campaign, which took things up to yet another level right after we launched, and just more and more people, including a lot more white people, white parents and teachers, et cetera, saying, "Oh gosh, we thought color blindness was the way to go. We thought that was what sort of raise good kids with healthy racial attitudes. That clearly
does not work. No.
So what do we do?
Right.
So suddenly there's a huge audience for it."
So we're going to have to wrap up in a moment, but I want you to tell our viewers a little bit more about Embrace Race and the full options and programs that you offer through your website and et cetera.
So I can start. So broadly speaking, so first of all, really what we're trying to do is support parents above all, but all caregivers, right? So that means teachers, it means other guardians, grandparents, you name it, pediatricians, psychologists. Essentially, one thing is we want people to understand that virtually every adult, right, plays some role in the life of a child, right? Can play a role for what that child understands and learns about race. And then how does that happen? How do we help? Well, through resources that we create and curate, through by building community, so that we can talk to others, build relationships with others who care about these issues, are living real things, are trying things, and have that exchange, and then through partnerships, right, so that we can reach more people and get the kind of expertise we need. So that's the basic. So, do you want to offer some specifics?
So part of that community and resources piece is the Talking Race and Kids monthly conversation that you mentioned.
And that I had the pleasure of taking part in a month or two ago.
Yes. I think we might be starting a children's publishing house because of you. Isn't that right?
Wonderful.
You made that
I
comment.
did online, yes.
We'll do it.
Why not?
So that's how we work. I mean, and we're evolving. We feel still young in not our ages, but in our organization.
Well, and 3 years is you just started to scratch the surface.
Right. And I want to just say that it's also about, as Andrew, I just want to emphasize that Andrew talked about practice, developing a parenting practice. And I want to emphasize that we bring our stories and our areas of work experience, expertise to this work, but we also realize that we ourselves need to work on our practice as parents. So I think of Embrace Race as hopefully we're able to model, doing some teaching, but also doing something that Dr. Adrian Keene likes to call consenting to learn in public, which I love because we're not, we live and have been shaped by the same, racially hierarchical society that, our kids are being, it's changed a bit, but so we're not immune to those influences at all.
It's an entire system around us. Yeah.
And Alan, let me add just one thing, just another example.
Okay.
As I said, we have emerging work. Just on the resource side, right? So yes, there's this monthly program that you are well aware of, but I just put the finishing touches on an application for funding to support work we're doing with a local museum, the Eric Carle Museum of Picture Book Art.
Eric Carle, the children's artist.
Exactly,
okay.
and what we know. So part of what we're responding to is all this research and experience showing that very young children are already developing their racial sensibilities, right? And yet, while there are resources aimed at teachers in classrooms for older children from middle school on, there's really very little for elementary and almost nothing for the youngest children who, again, are developing. I mean, it's happening.
Absolutely.
Right? So the question is, how do we as parents and teachers, et cetera, get involved in that conversation? The work we're hoping to get funded is about creating a toolkit, a video, book list, some other things to help, librarians and parents and teachers who want to use picture books, right, as a tool to work with kids around race, right? So that's a very practical example of the kind of work. And hopefully in the years to come, there'll be much, much more, as well as much more community for people to build relationships with each other.
So we're going to have to wrap up again, but I wanted to ask you, first of all, what is your website URL so we can put that on the screen?
It's embracerace.org.
Okay, good. We'll share that with our viewers. And what is one thing that you have found that has made an impact someplace on a group of people or one person that you had feedback from in the last 3 years that really told you, yeah, we're doing good stuff?
We get feedback all the time. We often feel like we're not, because we have a vision, we just can't get there soon enough, to have more supports for people. But we get emails. There was someone after maybe the webinar that you were on, or maybe it was this most recent one, who said that she had been, she watched the webinar and the next day she had to testify at the state house of her state, and as a proponent of ethnic studies, and that she used the research from what she'd heard that night. She quoted and used it in that presentation. So, but also just parents really, we do get a lot of feedback of, again, application, people who start to script conversations with their kids so that when something happens, again, the kid feels more prepared to sort of stand up for themselves. I think. Can you think of some examples?
Sure. I mean, I'll just offer, there really are many, but I think what came immediately to mind is, an email from someone who said that she just read a blog that I wrote, a blog post about, something that happened when our oldest daughter, who's now 10, was 5. And it was really about, an older white man who was teaching an astronomy class, right, and looking at the nighttime sky course that I took with my daughter, who would not engage my daughter, right, but referred to an Asian American boy who was 7, my daughter was 5, as a scientist.
Oh my!
And engaged him constantly. Took him up to do, and even though I approached this man 3 times, literally 3 different times, and said, if you're going to do a 90-minute lecture and do demonstrations, could you engage my daughter, who's 5, and who is, who's perhaps also a budding scientist? That would be awesome. He never resisted actively, but he never did it. And you just think about what that kind of moment It was actually within a year that the family went and heard a very prominent astronomer and scientist, talk about how when he himself had been 7 years old and 9 years old, he had had such an encounter with people who really encouraged him,
Yeah.
right? And clearly, it certainly hadn't hurt and may well have spurred him on to the course. And here's a man who loves his work. My daughter wasn't afforded the same opportunity. Well,
That same affirmation.
that same affirmation. So I wrote about that, and it is one of the many sparks for this work for us. And this woman wrote to say, white woman, middle-aged white woman who wrote to say, thank you, because even people like her who, think that they're aware, think they're woke, as we say,
Right.
they forget. They forget that, right? That race
What does it
and
look like?
gender and that these identities play out very, very differently for different.
And we're not aware of what we're not aware
We're
of.
not aware
So,
of, and, right? I mean, you're not keeping it, so it's
so if we have somebody point this out to us, it can change our lives and how we go through and interact with lots of people. We're gonna have to wrap up, but I want you to take it out. One sentence of advice from each of you for parents.
Start early. The research is pretty clear that by 3 years old, kids are making decisions about who they play with and other things like that based in part on race.
and stay with it and do the best you can, right? It is. It's not about getting. I think it's not about getting it right. Right? It's about staying with it and doing the best you can. Make it a routine conversation. Keep coming back to it, and things will work out much better than if you don't.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you both so much for being on the show. It's been a real joy chatting with you
Oh,
today.
thank you.
Alan,
Same.
thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank
appreciate
you.
you having
Yeah.
us.
Continued success in your work.
Thank you.
And you and yours. Thanks to the crew.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
everybody.
Yep. We'll definitely stay in touch. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us. If you're watching us on TV, stay tuned for our following segments on language and culture. If you're watching Feel Like You Belong on the internet, we hope you will share your feedback with us via our website and YouTube channel. And be sure to catch our many other conversations with inspiring immigrants and immigrant children who help to make these United States a better place.